Here's a question for you. How did Adolf Hitler successfully destroy German democracy? In his writings and in his speeches, Adolf Hitler comes across as deranged, paranoid, ignorant, buffoonish. And yet he successfully came to power through mostly democratic means, using his position to unleash the most systematic mass murder campaign in world history, ultimately bringing ruin on his country and much of the rest of the European continent. So how could such a calamity actually happen? How did he convince people to support him? And how can we ensure that no such scenario ever plays out again? Well, Hitler didn't come to power by promising to commit the Holocaust. That's important. As Ian Kershaw notes in his definitive biography of Hitler, in the crucial 1930 elections that multiplied the Nazis' parliamentary representation by tenfold, Hitler actually campaigned not on promises to destroy the Jews, but on the idea that the other parties had failed the country. He promised a sweeping program of national redemption. Kershaw writes, in the election campaign of 1930, Hitler seldom spoke explicitly of the Jews. The crude tirades of the early 1920s were missing altogether. The key theme was now the collapse of Germany under parliamentary democracy and party government into a divided people with separate and conflicting interests, which only the Nazi Party could overcome by creating a new unity of the nation, transcending class, estate, and profession. Now, when he was running this campaign, Hitler was, of course, no less of an anti-Semite than he'd been before. He still identified the Jews as the chief culprit for everything wrong with Germany, and that theory led him almost inexorably to the conclusion that exterminating them was justified and necessary. But he was politically savvy and capable of adjusting his pitch to fit particular moments. Now, mainstream publications sometimes foolishly assumed that Hitler's anti-Semitism was a bit of empty rhetoric designed to get votes, or they saw him as a clown. They failed to perceive the nature of the danger that he actually presented. Now, the lesson I take from this is that we have to be much more careful in our own time. When we see a neo-Nazi gathering steam, we must expose them, and we must prevent them from taking power. We must be constantly vigilant because the original Nazis were clever. They fashioned themselves into a mainstream political party. They bided their time. They waited for just the right moment, a time of national despair and chaos, and then took advantage of it to unleash their diabolical program. Never again, or so we hope. The far-right influencer, Nick Fuentes, is a neo-Nazi. But you wouldn't necessarily know that if you saw Fuentes on some of the popular podcasts he's been on lately, with fairly mainstream shows hosting him for appearances that have garnered millions of views. You also wouldn't necessarily know it if you'd read a recent article about him in GQ and his supposed legion of female fans, which also softens his politics. Now, the 27-year-old Fuentes hosts a live show on Rumble, and he's seen his audience explode over the last year after Elon Musk allowed him back on Twitter/X, where Fuentes contributes such comments as, if they aren't talking about Jewish power, it's because they're in on it. He now has nearly 1 million followers on that platform, and Fuentes has been the subject of critical features in Wired, The Atlantic, and the New York Times, the latter of which sent a photographer to capture him looking moody in his studio. Now, the Jewish power quote there is actually one of Fuentes' milder remarks. He's open about his love of Hitler.
Hitler was a pedophile and kind of a pagan. It's like, well, he was also really fucking cool. So, time to grow up. We're not children anymore. Am I right? Am I right? Am I right, boys? Am I right? Let's go. He was also really fucking cool. And any boy knows that. Anybody who watches these videos where he's rolling down the street and stuff, it's like, this guy's awesome. This guy's cool.
He's commented, they compare Putin to Hitler like it's a bad thing.
And now they're going on about Russia and Vladimir Putin is Hitler. And they say that's not a good thing. And I shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have said that. But
he was asked directly whether Hitler was bad. And Fuentes refused to respond directly, saying that if Hitler was bad, Churchill and Roosevelt are also bad.
Hitler, good guy, bad guy?
that's a tough. Well, there are no good and bad guys. They're just people.
But well, that's not true, dude.
It is true.
I mean, so if you had to check one box.
I'm going to say I'm neutral on that. I'm abstaining from
There's
that
no
one.
neutral.
You're saying that Hitler was not a bad guy?
I think that, it's
But then
World
you're
War.
questioning why people may not want you talking?
There's
I'm
a
giving
lot-
you a
well,
platform.
Look, if we're going to say Hitler bad, then I'm going to say Churchill bad, and I'm going to say Roosevelt bad, and I'm going to say they're all bad. But if we look at him as a product of his time in that moment, we have to judge him with those things in mind. That's all.
Fuentes is also an outright Holocaust denier. I don't believe in the Holocaust, he has said, which is pretty direct. With a big grin on his face on a live stream, he responded to a supposedly hypothetical question from a viewer about how 6 million cookies could have been baked in so few ovens.
The math doesn't quite seem to add up there. I don't think you'd result in 6 million, maybe 200 to 300,000 cookies. And I think the Red Cookie Association said something like that, probably 200 to 300,000 cookies baked. Probably.
As the cookie analogy steadily broke down over the course of his monologue, Fuentes began repeating classic Holocaust denial talking points, like the idea that the Red Cross said only 300,000 people died in concentration camps. They never did. And the idea that there were no high chimneys in aerial photographs of Auschwitz. Both of these have been debunked. Fuentes has actually told his supporters directly in a speech at a live rally that they should keep their Holocaust denial and their anti-Semitism somewhat quiet when speaking to others, even if they talk about them openly amongst themselves. He said, we all have these beliefs, but you know the consequences for believing them and for talking about them. I actually don't encourage you to go out there and tell everyone in mixed company, don't come home to your parents and say, hey, mom, dad, guess who runs America? Let's not do that, okay? Maybe you can, depends if your parents are cool. I came home from college, I told my parents, I said, Mom, Dad, you will never guess what never happened. And the audience laughs. You won't believe it. It never happened. And they were like, who raised you? I'm like, Mom, relax, okay? What are you, Jewish or something? So then I worked on them. Here's the thing. You got to play it close to the vest. Now, I'm actually reminded here of Heinrich Himmler's Posen speeches, one of the most important internal Nazi admissions of the Holocaust, in which Himmler actually said something rather similar. Amongst ourselves, for once, it shall be said quite openly, but all the same, we will never speak about it in public, which he said was the extermination of the Jewish people. Actually, here's a pop quiz. Who said it, Heinrich Himmler or Nick Fuentes? All I want is revenge against my enemies and a total Aryan victory. Ready? It's Fuentes.
All I want is revenge against my enemies and a total Aryan victory. Hugs and kisses, touch, sappy stuff, hand-holding, please. All I want is revenge and an Aryan victory for my people.
Now, despite saying that you gotta keep it close to the vest, Fuentes doesn't actually play his anti-Jewish hatred that close to the vest. He produces videos with titles like Exposing the Jewish Control Matrix, Organized Jewry, he says, operates like a transnational gang. He said, the Jews hate me. And you know who else the Jews hate? Jesus Christ. And he's promised elsewhere that the enemies of Christ have no future in this world. That, quote, we will make them die in the holy war, and they will go down with their satanic master.
We need to eradicate Jewish stranglehold over the United States of America. We're in a holy war, and I will tell you this. Because we're willing to die in the holy war, we will make them die in the holy war. And they will go down. We have God on our side. and they will go down with their satanic master. They have no future in America. The enemies of Christ have no future in this world.
Fuentes is a rabid Christian nationalist who has promised to purge the country of non-Christians, and the speech was given in front of a projection showing guns and bullets. Now, it should come as no surprise to you that Fuentes is also a misogynist. He believes women shouldn't go to college. He says rape is so not a big deal. He says he could totally imagine murdering his hypothetical wife because I just get mad. Then he insisted he was kidding, but women really do piss me off. If he does ever find someone willing to marry him, he's said that he wants them to be 16 years old. He described his ideal society as one where birth control, fornication, and pornography are outlawed, women have no careers, and no vote. In his words, it's not enough to say we're against trannies. You've got to be against women's rights too. We want to go back to the Middle Ages. He said that society began to go awry when we stopped burning women alive.
What happened in the good old days 1,000 years ago when people like this, instead of arguing with them or saying, hey, listen, darling, everything's okay, they would dunk them in the river or burn them alive. I said, this is the kind of thing that we need to see more of, is burning them alive a little bit more.
Oh, but of course there he says there he's a moderate because it's only when they're convicted of crimes. Although the crime in question is witchcraft. Now, Fuentes is also homophobic, condemning the, quote, filthy anal sex of gay men. But he also appears to be a proud incel, saying that having sex with women is gay.
If we're really being honest, never having a girlfriend, never having sex with a woman, really makes you more heterosexual. Because honestly, dating women is gay. Having sex with women is gay.
Now this goes on and on. Of course, he also hates Muslims, and don't get him started on black people. White people are every single bit justified in being racist, he has said. He said the Jim Crow era was better for black people. They had to drink out of a different water fountain. Big fucking deal. Who cares? Fuentes said. He's also said of black people, they make me nervous, and I'm not surprised. Someone who openly uses the N-word, as Fuentes does, might have some reason to be nervous around black people. Now, Fuentes thinks America should be ruled by a Catholic Taliban. That's his phrase.
Banning gay marriage is back on the menu. Banning sodomy is back on the menu. Banning contraceptives is back on the menu. And basically, we're having something like Taliban rule in America, in a good way. We're having something like a Catholic Taliban rule in America.
Despite having once been a staunch supporter of Donald Trump, saying, I am a Trump cultist, I'm a soldier for Donald Trump, he's now savagely critical of Donald Trump, often for being too soft on immigrants. Fuentes is disgusted, for instance, by J.D. Vance's biracial family, considering Vance complicit in the so-called Great Replacement. You can't make me go and vote for some fat ass with some mixed race family, he's said. Isn't he lovely? He also dislikes Trump's support of Israel, not because Fuentes seems to have much sympathy for Palestinians, but because he thinks it's an example of the Jews controlling the government. Now, Fuentes' neo-Nazi sympathies, his hatred of women, his violent anti-Semitism, and so on, are on open display for the world to see. He summarized his ideology as, quote,
Jews are running society, women need to shut the fuck up, blacks need to be imprisoned for the most part, and we would live in paradise. It's that simple.
Yet even though Fuentes has been clear that he wants to see the, quote, enemies of Christ killed in a holy war, and been frank about his admiration of Hitler, he's been treated with kid gloves in plenty of venues, with people who should know better failing to tell their readers and listeners about Fuentes' true beliefs. Patrick Bet David, host of the popular PBD podcast, had Fuentes on, and while making clear he disagreed with Fuentes, said that Fuentes is hated by many who simply don't have a clue who the guy is. Bet David allowed Fuentes to present himself as simply a man with some controversial opinions, who's constantly being cancelled instead of listened to. I hope you enjoy getting to know this individual Bet David told his audience. But he didn't help them get to know the fact that Fuentes is a neo-Nazi. He's a neo-Nazi. I didn't enjoy getting to know Nick Fuentes. I got to know him plenty over the course of researching this. I did not enjoy it. Now, the traditionalist Catholic magazine Crisis also softened Fuentes' Nazism, saying that while he has baggage, I'll say, and has said things that no Catholic should defend, his attachment to Catholic doctrine appears genuine. The Crisis writer praised him because he defends marriage with conviction, champions family without apology, and pushes back on the cultural war against Christian belief with a bluntness many bishops avoid. He says he wants to burn women as witches and kill the globalists. He loves Hitler. How many times can I say this? The man loves Adolf Hitler. Now, some people don't even seem to be aware of the extent of Fuentes' pro-Hitler violent beliefs. Joe Rogan questioned whether Fuentes was a Holocaust denier or whether he just debates the numbers. Well, he's clearly a denier, as we have seen, but when asked about his Holocaust denial by the New York Times, Fuentes retreated to the position that he's just asking questions. He said, quote, "I've never taken a hard position. I've never done the deep dive into it, to tell you the truth." Well, if you haven't done a deep dive into it, maybe you should shut the fuck up about it. How about that? Comedian Dave Smith just had Fuentes on his own podcast for a friendly discussion. When they turned to the Jewish question, Fuentes explained his theory Jews are manipulating America with only light pushback from Smith. And in yet another friendly interview, Glenn Greenwald said to Fuentes that it's easy for people to demonize and attack you by taking these quotes that can sound not just very racist, but very almost Nazi-like, and a kind of extermination rhetoric, suggesting that Fuentes was in fact engaged in ironic humor. And he encouraged people to watch Fuentes' show. But there is nothing ironic in Fuentes' Holy War speech to his followers, in which he encourages them to keep their Holocaust denial close to the vest. It's a very sincere exhortation to be soldiers for God, to infiltrate the system, he says, and to create a fully Christianized country. I have no doubt that Fuentes' actual, bona fide, ideal America, the one he wants to see, is fully purged of black people, Muslims, Jews, and atheists, with women kept as chattel, disciplined with violence. I believe this because it's what Fuentes says when he's talking to his audience. When I did a couple of years back a deep dive into the way the New York Times covered Hitler's rise in the 1920s, one of the most frustrating things that I found in that was how naive the Times was about Hitler. The Times wrote in the 1920s that several reliable, well-informed sources confirmed the idea that Hitler's anti-Semitism was not so genuine or violent as it sounded, and that he was merely using anti-Semitism as a bait to catch followers and keep them aroused, enthusiastic, and in line. Well, oops. And so Nick Fuentes alarms me because he really does seem a lot like Hitler. He's really easy to laugh at, but he's filled with consistent anger and a grandiose sense of historic destiny. And he is, in his own way, charismatic. The stuff he says is deranged, but he says it with such conviction and self-assurance that plenty of credulous followers will swallow it. Now, I don't currently think that Fuentes is a particularly likely candidate to become an American Führer, just because he's so personally repellent and aggressively uncool. He openly despises and belittles his own fans, the so-called Groypers, who are named after a cartoon toad. "I can barely contain my true feeling about you," he says, "my true animosity and hatred, utter disdain," he said, speaking to the people who like him. Beyond that, there are other structural factors in the way of Fuentes' ascent. The US is a much more diverse country than 1930s Germany was, meaning that he'd have to win without the support of a huge percentage of the population. The female 50% of the country, they have no reason to support someone who wants to burn them as witches. And incels are, thank God, not a majority. And I suspect the Groyper army will largely stay in their parents' basements. And I'm not really meaning that as an insult. Fuentes literally broadcast out of his parents' basement after he dropped out of college. Fuentes may end up becoming another George Lincoln Rockwell, who was the leader of the American Nazi Party. He remained marginal, and then he was assassinated by one of his own former followers in the 1960s. Many Americans are proud of this country's history of fighting Nazism, and sympathy with Hitler is just about the only remaining political taboo. But even if he is kept from power, and we shouldn't be certain of that, given that Hitler, too, was written off as a fringe idiot, Fuentes may succeed at making neo-Nazi beliefs more common in this country. Already he has boasted that views that used to be fringe, such as open racism, which has been thankfully taboo for a few decades, are becoming more respectable again on the right. He said, "Think about how far we've come in a year and a half. How similar to me they all sound." Sadly, he's correct about that. Now, Fuentes has a plan, a long-term one. He's promised that slowly but surely, piece by piece, it's not unlikely that in 5, 10, 15 years, we will have 10,000 hard-hitting groypers in every corridor of power. The plan is that bit by bit, we start to break down these walls, we start to get back in, and then one day we become the mainstream, referring to the right-wing organizations that have banned him and other white nationalists. Now, Fuentes knows that accomplishing this will require him to burnish his image a little bit. It'll require, he says, quote, changing our look and aesthetic to blend in, put on the American flag. He recently lamented that we're going to have to stop saying the N-word on the show.
We're going to have to stop saying the N-word on the show. Did you see that, by the way, at America Fest? Patrick Bet-David said he wouldn't interview me because I'm saying the N-word all the time. That's so ridiculous. I mean, are you serious? But it's true. But it's true. We can't have a professional operation if we're always saying the N-word. So
I agree.
We all have to make sacrifices, and that is one of the great ones. So,
and when he does that, he can probably get the mainstream media in America eating out of his hands. I can already see the New York Times story. A chastened Fuentes moderates his tone. I also think Fuentes is poised to take advantage of a political opening which has been created by the failure of the two major political parties in this country. He's lamented the fact that our kids and this generation is never going to own anything. Debt slavery, never owning a house, never owning a car, never paying off their school, never making an income to support a family, not being able to have a family. When he says things like that, he sounds a bit like Bernie Sanders for a minute, until you find out that he thinks the answer is mass deportation and stopping the Jewish cabal that runs the country. He draws from the Nazi playbook of combining superficial economic populism with the scapegoating of minorities. He says, the far left is terrified of the far right because they know that if given the opportunity, the masses would prefer their working class economic populism without black super predators, third world immigrants, transgenders, and Jewish power. In fact, leftists would look at this a bit differently, arguing that working class economic populism prevents you from needing to blame third world immigrants and Jewish power for your problems because it guarantees everyone gets to live in an affordable country. Now, Fuentes has also reaped benefits from Israel's genocide in Gaza. Some of Fuentes' tweets about Israel sound like they could have come from a leftist. For example, just one day after Trump supposedly put Israel on notice for violating the ceasefire, today he's declaring the US will personally save Netanyahu from being prosecuted by the Israeli courts. Imagine going to the mat for Trump every day and defending this. I'm sure there are plenty of people who've seen, for example, a Fuentes tweet critical of US support for the bombing of Iran, and they've clicked follow, not realizing they were then going to be served an endless stream of conspiratorial content about the Jewish control matrix. Now, one of my own convictions about Nazis is that we must take the threat they pose very seriously indeed. And we must understand that their methods involve duplicity. We know Fuentes wants to impose a racist theocratic dictatorship on the country, and we must approach all decisions about when to engage with him and cover him with the understanding that this is his mission. It doesn't mean we can never talk about him or pay him any attention. I mean, sometimes I think you have to. That's what I'm doing here, although I understand that by doing it, I'm in some sense giving him what he wants. But we have to approach this with open eyes, Watch his Holy War speech to his followers. Don't be naive about this guy. I mean, there are members of Congress who have attended his events. Donald Trump's had dinner with him, supposedly without knowing who he was. An extremism researcher told Wired that young Trump supporters listen to Nick Fuentes, and if they don't listen to him, they listen to people who've been influenced by him. So because these groypers keep their beliefs somewhat quiet in mixed company, as Fuentes says, there may already be some or plenty in positions of power. We have to take this stuff seriously. So none of this, he just has some controversial opinion stuff. And please don't call him, I don't know, America's most canceled man or something. The Atlantic recently ran with America's next top racist. Now, I've never been a proponent of deplatforming because I think sometimes it's worth debating even the most odious people in order to expose them. But it's unforgivable to overlook or set aside Fuentes' neo-Nazism, his violent misogyny, his Holocaust denial, and his plan for a dictatorial Catholic state inspired by Adolf Hitler. We should also give no credence to the idea that he's engaged in irony or edgy jokes when he says things like, "Your body, my choice forever." These supposed jokes are also, as far as we can tell, Fuentes' actual beliefs. If Fuentes ever succeeds in the political project he's committed to, he will turn this country into a true fascist nightmare that makes Donald Trump and J.D. Vance look like social democrats. We have to take this shit seriously, keep people like this as pariahs, thwart any effort to make them more mainstream or legitimate. And fighting them requires offering a powerful, inspiring alternative to far-right politics. Nazis fill political vacuums at moments of crisis. If the left can give people a movement worth believing in, based on humane values of solidarity and justice, then slimy neo-Nazis like Nick Fuentes will stand no chance of attaining political influence. On the other hand, in the absence of a credible, organized alternative, far-right holy war may just be getting started. Now, I know Nick Fuentes saw the article this video is based off because he actually responded to Current Affairs on Twitter. He didn't have much of a rebuttal. All he said was, "Grow up." My response to him would be, "Fuck off, Nazi scum." You know, so many of us have a sense that the political system is corrupted by corporate influence. But how does that influence work exactly? When did it start? Who gives the money? What does it buy exactly? Well, for answers to questions like that, we at Current Affairs turn to our friends at The Lever, which is a critical, reader-supported, investigative news outlet. They hold the powerful accountable. And Lever's David Sirota and Jared Jakang Mayer have just released the book version of their award-winning podcast, Master Plan, which documents exactly how the oligarchs bought our political system. And I recently interviewed David about this fantastic book. I'm a huge admirer of all the work that David Sirota and the Lever do, and we're delighted to be partnering with them. So they are offering their readers a discount on Current Affairs subscriptions, and we're delighted to be offering our readers a discount to the Lever. You get 50% off forever on the Lever subscription, and also a free copy of the Master Plan ebook if you click the link in the description. And so once you claim your ebook, you'll receive a follow-up email with a link to that ebook. And you can watch my interview with David if you haven't already. You'll see that they've really done a fantastic job with the reporting in Master Plan. And so as the Supreme Court of the United States enables corruption and oligarchs openly seize government after spending a record-breaking amount in the 2024 election, Master Plan is arriving at a really critical moment, just as Project 2025, the second Trump presidency, are working to enact the final phase of the 50-year master plan that's documented in this book. So we encourage you to support our friends over at The Lever as they are encouraging their readers to support Current Affairs magazine. And we believe that independent left media that holds the powerful to account needs to stick together. That's why, just as we partnered with our friends at Majority Report, we're pleased to be partnering up with Lever here. So please do check out their work. And of course, as always, subscribe if you haven't to the print edition of Current Affairs magazine.